Section 18 of the Early Tudors by Charles Edward Moberly. This Librivox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 13, Moore and Fisher, 1531 to 1535, Part 2. By the middle of 1534, the discontent against Henry was getting still more dangerous. We can trace, almost day by day, the steps of the conspiracy. On the 9th of July, Lord Dacre of the North was indicted before the Peers for treasonable correspondence with the Scots, but they voted his acquittal with a boldness which astonished everyone, and gave great confidence to the malcontents, as in case of failure they might be able to safeguard one another in the same way. All through September several noblemen were trying to arrange an invasion from Flanders with Chapuis, Charles's ambassador. Lord Darcy promised to raise 8,000 men in aid of it. Lords Dacre and Derby, and even the Duke of Northumberland, the last loyal peer north of the Trent, were prepared to join. Men like the acute Lord Sandys and Dr. Butts, the king's physician, thought that Charles would have no difficulty whatever in conquering the country, which had now scarcely any navy left. Even the courtiers hardly made a secret of their contempt for Anne, paying visits to the Princess Mary under her very eyes. If Mary was sent to the Tower, Sir W. Kingston was ready to take up her cause, while if Henry was once dethroned, he was pretty sure to find that for him there was no prison but the grave. At almost the same time, Lord Thomas Fitzgerald, who had been made Irish deputy when his father, Lord Kildare, was summoned to England, threw up his office on hearing of Kildare's imprisonment, June 11th, and immediately plunged into rebellion, calling on Charles for help. He was, he declared, of the Pope's sect and ban. Him he would serve against the king and all his partakers. Henry and all who took his part were accursed. Sir John White, the governor of Dublin, was unable to defend the city, as the Fitzgeralds, while in power, had stripped it of military stores. Alan, the Archbishop of Dublin, tried to make his way to England for help, but was intercepted and murdered near Clontarf. Dublin Castle was besieged till October, but saved at last by the Earl of Ormond, who made a diversion by attacking the besiegers' homes in Kildare. After much delay, some forces were sent over from England. Lord Kildare's castle of Maynooth, which was supposed to be impregnable, was battered down by Henry's artillery, and by what is called in Irish tradition the pardon of Maynooth, the greater part of its defenders were hanged on the ruins. Lord Thomas was thenceforward a fugitive, yet he was bold enough to stay in Ireland in the hope that imperial troops might be on the way to help him. As none arrived, he tried in August 1535 to make his peace with Lord Leonard Grey, the new deputy, who was his relation by marriage. Grey, on his own showing, allured him with comfortable words to surrender, and it seems too clear, promised that his life should be spared. But the pledge was broken. He remained in prison for about a year, and was then executed with his 5 uncles, leaving the male part of the family to be represented by one youth whom his friends had concealed. Instead of really sounding the depths of the conspiracy against him, Henry seems to have thought in the latter part of 1534 that it would be enough to terrify consciences by the new Act of Succession. If they were firm, honest, and resistant consciences, so much the better for his purpose. His new commission of oaths might be made a crucial test of loyalty, if applied not to nobles like Darcy or Northumberland, who would have made any professions without giving up their plans, but to such men as Moore, Fisher, and the monks of the Charterhouse, who were likely to swear what they meant and mean what they swore. The Carthusian community had a high reputation for holiness. Houghton, its prior, was known to have warned his penitents against admitting the royal supremacy in church affairs with whatever mental reservation, and it was certain that he would himself refuse the oath. On his doing so, he was prosecuted with 2 other priors of his order, and on the 15th of May, 1535, they suffered the penalty for treason in its fullest horror. giving God thanks as they passed to the rope and quartering knife, that they were held worthy to suffer for the truth. Many others of the brotherhood were either executed later on or chained to posts in Newgate, and there, by express order, so starved and otherwise ill-treated that 9 out of 10 thus imprisoned died within a fortnight. Somewhat earlier than this, the first steps had been taken for the trial of Sir Thomas More. On the 13th of April he had been ordered to appear before the Commission of Oaths. As he went to his boat at Chelsea, he closed the garden gate behind him, that his children might not follow him as usual to the waterside, and whispered after a few minutes to Roper, his son-in-law, "I thank our Lord the field is won." He had overcome all fears and was ready to meet any consequences. Being called upon to swear to the Act of Succession, he replied by a distinction. Parliament, he said, had complete power to settle the succession to the throne, and he would willingly swear true allegiance to the heir named by it. But to no nullifying of the first marriage, such as the preamble of the Act contained, would he consent to commit himself. He was therefore sent to the Tower, where Bishop Fisher had been ever since his conviction in the nuns' affair. Just then it occurred to the ministers that More's crime, after all, was not capital, as the Act had made it only misprision of treason to refuse the oath. It was therefore thought better to challenge him on the subject of the royal supremacy over the Church, as admitted in 1531 and established by Act of Parliament in 1534. Accordingly, Cromwell went to the Tower and called upon him to swear on this point, which he at once refused to do, and thus brought his life within the reach of the law. Cardinal Fisher, for the new Pope, Paul III, had given him this title since his imprisonment, thus incensing Henry far more against him, made the same noble answer, and was within a few days tried, sentenced, and executed. June 22nd, 1535. More's trial began on the 6th of May. He was prosecuted as having originally dissuaded the king from marrying Anne, as refusing to acknowledge him for head of the Church, and as having written treasonable letters to Fisher from his prison. To the first charge he replied that a privy councillor's honest advice to the king cannot be treasonable. To the second, that he kept silence without malice, and only because anything he said would have been misconstrued. To the third, that the letters to Fisher were burnt, and that no evidence was offered of their contents, which he declared had no relation to the matter of the charge. Sir Richard Rich, the Attorney General, then swore that the accused, while in prison, had expressly stated to him that Parliament had no power to make anyone head of the Church. "I never said so," retorted More, "nor is it likely that what I concealed from His Majesty I should reveal to one of light tongue and not commendable fame." After his sentence, some attempts were made to bring him to submission by a side wind, but they were all in vain, and he was executed on the 6th of July. His quiet humour, both at the foot of the scaffold and just before the axe fell, has often excited admiration, yet perhaps less than if it were considered that Sir W. Kingston was his dear friend whom he was anxious to cheer in that supreme moment. Never perhaps was this great man better described than in a passage of The Spectator, which, though not ascribed to Addison, still is serene and pure like him. The innocent mirth which had been so conspicuous in his life did not forsake him to the last. His death was of a piece with his life. There was nothing in it new, forced, or affected. He did not look upon the severing of his head from his body as a circumstance which ought to produce any change in the disposition of his mind, and as he died in a fixed and settled hope of immortality, he thought any unusual degree of concern improper. His head was savagely set up on London Bridge, stolen from thence by his beloved daughter, Margaret Roper, and seen many years afterwards in her coffin close to what had been her heart. We sometimes meet with men whose turn is so far sceptical that they sympathise for a while with the freest inquiry, and lead on others by their apparent acquiescence, while at the same time a deeply seated and almost physical conservatism rules their heart and conscience, and they are likely at any moment to fall back with unshaken conviction upon arguments which they seemed long ago to have outgrown. Such a man was Sir Thomas More. Hence, toward the end of his life, he was intellectually much more like his early patron, Cardinal Morton, than the Erasmus who had been his delight in early manhood. Now he saw nothing unlikely in the idea that God might work miracles by means of particular images or relics. If more than one place claimed to possess the body of a saint, he thought it enough to reply that part of the body might be in one place, part in another, or that there might be two saints of the same name, or that relics genuine in themselves might have been wrongly styled. It was, he thought, easy to believe that specially beautiful or specially old images might be the channels of great blessing. Forgetting Laurentius Vala's refutation, he boldly appealed to our Lord's portrait sent by him to Abgarus of Edessa as justifying the use of images in general. Above all arguments, he constantly refers to the indefectibility of the Church. Any taint of real idolatry would, he thought, have falsified our Lord's promise, and therefore nothing that the Church ever did can have this character. And as a corollary to this, he always thought it enough to justify any superstition if he could show that it was practiced by the fathers of the first 4 centuries. He has been accused as Chancellor of great and even extrajudicial cruelty to Lutherans, and it must be admitted that the peculiar dogmatism of Luther had always been odious to him, as putting aside the sounder views of Reformation in union with culture which he had learned from Erasmus and Colet. But on the charge of torturing Protestants out of court, there is no need to doubt his assertion that only twice did he ever do anything even distantly resembling this. Once when he ordered a moderate whipping to a boy who used profane language, and once when he cured a man whose madness took the form of heresy by stripes applied with much vigour. As to the latter case, we must not, of course, forget that beating and starvation were almost up to our memory the accepted treatment for insane persons, and that here and there the same notion still survives. It cannot unfortunately be denied that he allowed his jurisdiction to be invoked by the bishops, and misused it by keeping men in prison when they ought legally to have been released, nor that he was too deeply concerned in the death of Bilney, whose chief heresy was charging the priesthood with immorality, and of Bainham, who held that if a Jew or Saracen trusts in God and keeps his law, he is a good Christian man, and was therefore racked in the Tower by the Chancellor's order. It is impossible not to feel deep sorrow in contrasting More's spirit as regards persecution with that of Wolsey, who is said to have found some means to save every heretic brought personally before him. Indeed, we find with pleasure that the Tenterden men already mentioned, whom Warham judged in 1511 for denying the chief Roman doctrines, were not executed after all. Even the threatening persecution of 1527 at Oxford, which Delabar's personal narrative given by Froude and Maitland describes with so much life, was ended without bloodshed by the accused persons making a kind of recantation and bearing a faggot at St. Paul's. Yet if More is less humane than Wolsey, he is far above both Audley, his successor in the chancellorship, and Cranmer. He would not have racked people with his own hands like the former, and would have been incapable of the levity with which Cranmer speaks in 1533 of one Frith, who looketh to go to the fire for holding concerning the sacrament after the manner of Ecolampadius. And if we condemn some of his actions, we must remember that the very standard by which we test them was first created by him. He it is who first assigned to human life its true value, maintaining that it ought never to be taken for anything short of murder, because, as he puts it, law has the same right to give a man a dispensation for robbery or adultery as for killing another because he steals. His was the first protest against the perpetual paring away of poor men's wages, and against the constant and increasing sycophancy of judges. Above all, he declares that in Utopia any one may be of what religion he will, and that even atheists, though excluded from government because they cannot rule nobly, are still not to be visited with any farther punishment. The least, then, that can be required of a real student of history is, first, that such a man's life, character, opinions, and practice shall all be taken into account in judging of him, and then that it should be considered whether a man of high honour, who resolves to die for a noble cause, does not thus irresistibly claim that the balance of judgment should be in his favour, even if all his actions cannot be approved. End of Section 18.